The crystal flute felt cold in Eleanor Vance's hand, a stark contrast to the forced warmth of her smile. From across the ballroom of their Manhattan penthouse, she watched her husband Julian charm a captivated audience. He was magnetic, a titan of industry celebrating his 45th birthday and a decade of unimaginable success. He raised his glass, his eyes finding hers. "To my beautiful wife, Eleanor." He projected his voice echoing with practiced sincerity. "My anchor, my partner, the love of my life." The room erupted in applause. But Eleanor saw it, a flicker in his eyes, a shadow of a secret that chilled her more than the champagne. It was a look she was beginning to recognize, a look that whispered a terrifying question. Who was he when he wasn't looking at her? The Vance residence was less a home and more a statement. Perched 70 floors above Central Park, the penthouse was a sprawling expanse of glass, steel, and meticulously curated art. It was a testament to Julian Vance's meteoric rise in the world of high-stakes real estate development. He hadn't just built skyscrapers, he had built an empire, and Eleanor Vance was meant to be its queen. Their life was a carefully orchestrated symphony of success. Mornings were for green juice, and reviewing Julian's schedule, afternoons for charity luncheons at the Modern or board meetings for the New York City Ballet, and evenings were for dazzling galas, where their presence was as mandatory as the black tie dress code. Eleanor played her part with flawless precision. She was poised, elegant, a graduate of Sotheby's Institute of Art, who had set aside her own ambitions to cultivate the perfect environment for her husband's. She managed their 3 homes, the Manhattan penthouse, a sprawling estate in the Hamptons, and a ski chalet in Aspen, with the efficiency of a CEO. She knew which forks to use, which politicians to charm, and which rival's wife to befriend. She was by all accounts the perfect millionaire's wife, and she had believed with every fiber of her being that they had the perfect marriage. Julian was her college sweetheart, the ambitious boy from the wrong side of the tracks, who had promised her the world and had actually delivered it. He was charming, attentive, and she thought fiercely devoted. He still brought her coffee in bed, left her notes on the bathroom mirror, and looked at her in a way that made her feel like the only woman in the world. For 15 years their life had been their shared dream. But lately, a subtle dissonance had crept into their perfect symphony, a single note played jarringly out of key. It had started small. A new password on his personal laptop, which had always been open between them. Late-night calls he started taking on the terrace, the cold night air muffling his voice into a low, urgent hum. When she'd asked, he'd smiled that disarming smile of his. "Just business, Elle. A sensitive deal in Hong Kong. You know how it is." And she had, or she'd wanted to. Then came the credit card statements. Eleanor had always managed their personal finances, a task she found grounding amidst the abstractions of their wealth. A charge from a florist she didn't recognize, Petal, not their usual place on Madison Avenue. A dinner for 2 at a ridiculously expensive avant-garde restaurant in a part of Brooklyn they never frequented. When she'd pointed it out, Julian had barely looked up from his iPad. "That was for the Henderson account, sweetheart. Had to wine and dine them. You know the game." He was so smooth, so plausible that he almost made her feel foolish for asking. He was gaslighting her, she would later realize, with the casual expertise of a master manipulator. The real crack in the facade appeared on the night of his 45th birthday party. The penthouse was filled with the city's elite. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and waiters moved silently through the crowd with trays of champagne and caviar. Eleanor, draped in a stunning midnight blue Chanel gown, was the consummate hostess. She laughed with a senator, discussed art with a gallery owner, and deflected praise for the event's perfection. It was during Julian's toast that the chill set in. As he spoke of her, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes met hers across the room. But behind the public declaration of love, she saw that flicker again. It was a ghost of a glance, a momentary disconnect, as if he were reading from a script he no longer believed. The applause was deafening, but all Eleanor could hear was the frantic pounding of her own heart. The doubt, once a whisper, was now a scream. Later that night, long after the last guest had departed and the staff had cleared away the remnants of the celebration, Eleanor lay awake in their cavernous bedroom. The city lights glittered below a silent, indifferent audience to her turmoil. Julian was asleep beside her, his breathing deep and even. He looked peaceful, innocent. A liar. Slipping out of bed, she padded barefoot into his dressing room, a space larger than most New York apartments. It smelled of him, of cedar leather and his signature Tom Ford cologne. Her hands trembled as she went to the jacket he'd been wearing earlier, a custom-made Brioni tuxedo. She slid her hand into the inside pocket, not knowing what she was looking for. A receipt. A business card. Her fingers closed around a small velvet-covered box. It wasn't a ring box. It was longer, slenderer. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black satin, was a delicate platinum necklace. A single pear-shaped diamond hung from the chain, shimmering under the dim light. It was exquisite. And it wasn't for her. His birthday was today, not hers. Their anniversary wasn't for months. She snapped the box shut, the click echoing in the silent room. Her first instinct was denial. It's a gift for his mother. For his sister. But his mother preferred gold and his sister lived in London. This was intimate. This was a lover's gift. She put the box back, her movements stiff and robotic. She returned to the bedroom and slid back under the covers, careful not to wake him. She lay there staring at the ceiling, the image of the necklace burned into her mind. The man sleeping beside her, the man whose life she had so carefully helped build, was a stranger. He was living a life she knew nothing about. A life that included secret gifts and hushed phone calls on the terrace. The trust that had been the bedrock of their marriage had been pulverized into dust, and in its place a cold, hard certainty began to form. She was not going to be a fool. She was not going to cry and throw accusations that he could deflect with his silver-tongued lies. He had underestimated her. He saw the perfect wife, the socialite, the keeper of his home. He had forgotten the woman she used to be, sharp, analytical, and relentless. Eleanor Vance, the millionaire's wife, was going to find out the truth. She didn't know it yet, but this decision was the first step on a path that would lead to the complete and utter destruction of the world she knew. It was a path that would unravel a web of deceit far more complex and dangerous than a simple affair, a path that would force her to confront not just her husband's betrayal, but the terrifying truth about the foundation of their entire life. As the first light of dawn broke over the city, Eleanor closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in a silent declaration of war. The gilded cage had become a battlefield and she was preparing for combat. The days following Julian's birthday were a masterclass in deception on both their parts. Julian, perhaps sensing a shift in the atmosphere, became almost suffocatingly attentive. He sent her flowers from their usual florist, and made a point of being home for dinner every night, regaling her with detailed, almost rehearsed accounts of his day. He was trying to build a new wall of lies over the cracks in the old one. Eleanor, in turn, played the part of the devoted wife with chilling perfection. She smiled, she listened, she kissed him goodnight, all the while feeling a chasm of ice grow between them. Her grief was a private, silent thing, a sharp stone she carried in her chest. She channeled that pain, that burgeoning rage, into a cold, methodical focus. Her days were no longer about charity luncheons. They were about reconnaissance. She began her investigation not with a private detective that felt too much like admitting defeat, but with the tools of her own trade research and analysis. She was, after all, an art expert. She knew how to spot a forgery. Her first target was their finances. She logged into their private banking portal, a place she knew as well as her own closet. She bypassed the joint accounts and went straight for Julian's personal Amex Centurion card, the one he used for discretionary spending. She scrolled back months, her eyes scanning for anomalies. And there it was, a recurring charge that made her breath catch in her throat. Russo Studios. It appeared every month like clockwork. The amounts varied, but they were substantial. Thousands of dollars. It wasn't a gallery she recognized. A quick search revealed it was a private art studio in Dumbo, Brooklyn. The website was minimalist and chic, showcasing abstract sculptures in metal and reclaimed wood. The artist's name was Sophia Russo. Eleanor clicked on the artist's bio. A photo showed a woman in her late 20s with wild, dark curls, intense probing eyes, and a paint-smudged smile. She was beautiful, but not in the polished, manicured way of the women in Eleanor's circle. She was raw, vibrant, and alive. A pang of something ugly and unfamiliar jealousy shot through Eleanor. It wasn't just that she was beautiful. It was that she was an artist. She was everything Eleanor had given up to become Mrs. Julian Vance. The bio said Sophia Russo was a rising star, a protege of several influential collectors. Was Julian one of them? The narrative was plausible. Julian loved to discover new talent. It fed his ego. He could easily frame this as a patron-artist relationship, but the frequency and size of the payments felt too personal, too consistent for a simple patronage. Next, Eleanor turned her attention to the car. Julian had recently bought a new Tesla Model S, a car he boasted was the future. The future, Eleanor discovered, was trackable. Using the Tesla app on her own phone, which was linked to the family account, she could see the car's location history. Most of the trips were predictable, to his office on Park Avenue, to the golf club in Westchester, to their Hamptons estate. But then she found the pattern. 2 or 3 times a week, always in the late afternoon, the car would travel across the Manhattan Bridge to Brooklyn. It would park for several hours on a quiet cobblestone street in Dumbo, the same street where Russo Studios was located. He would tell her he was stuck in a late meeting with the board, his voice filled with feigned exhaustion. In reality, he was with her. The evidence was piling up, each piece a brick in the wall of his betrayal. Yet it was all circumstantial. He could still explain it away. He was a patron. He was mentoring a young artist. The lies were infuriatingly plausible. Eleanor needed something concrete, something undeniable. She decided it was time to bring in a professional. She didn't want a bulldog investigator who would kick down doors. She needed a ghost. Through a discreet referral from a lawyer she trusted, she found a man named Martin Quinn. He was a former financial crimes investigator for the FBI, a quiet, meticulous man who specialized in high-net-worth individuals. They met in a quiet corner of the Frick collection, surrounded by old master paintings. Eleanor, in sunglasses and a silk scarf, felt like a character in a spy novel. She laid out her suspicions calmly and concisely, presenting the bank statements and the location data. She omitted the necklace. It felt too personal, too painful to share. Quinn listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Vance," he said when she finished, his voice low and gravelly. "In my experience, when a man like your husband builds an empire, he believes he is entitled to build a second, smaller one in secret. The question is, what are the assets of this secret empire? Is it just this woman, or is there more?" He agreed to take the case. His methods would be silent, digital, and leave no trace. He would delve into Sophia Russo, into Julian's private communications, into the very fabric of the life he was hiding. A week later, Quinn's first report arrived in a password-protected email. It was concise and devastating. Sophia Russo was not just some struggling artist Julian had taken under his wing. She was living in a luxury loft apartment in the same building as her studio, an apartment that Quinn's sources confirmed was being paid for by an offshore LLC. An LLC that Quinn had managed to trace back to a holding company owned by Vance Development. Julian wasn't just her patron. He was her landlord, her benefactor, her keeper. The report included photographs, grainy long-lens shots, but their meaning was clear. Julian and Sophia laughing as they walked into her building, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Julian and Sophia sharing a kiss in the front seat of his Tesla, a moment of unguarded intimacy that felt like a physical blow to Eleanor. He had never looked at Eleanor like that, not even in the beginning. It was a look of raw, unbridled desire, free from the weight of shared history and public expectation. But then came the twist, the detail that shifted the entire narrative from a sordid affair to something much more complex and dangerous. Martin Quinn had dug into Sophia Russo's past. She wasn't from New York. She had arrived 2 years ago from Miami. Before that, her history was murky. But he had found something in the financial records of her now-defunct Florida art gallery. A major early investor, a man who had provided the seed money for her first big show, was a name Eleanor knew all too well: Robert Sterling. Robert Sterling was Julian's fiercest rival. He was a ruthless corporate raider who had been trying to execute a hostile takeover of Vance Development for the past year. They were locked in a bitter public battle for control of a multi-billion-dollar waterfront project. Julian hated him with a passion that bordered on obsession. Eleanor stared at the name on the screen, her mind racing, trying to connect the dots. Was it a coincidence? Or was Sophia Russo not just a mistress, but a weapon? A Trojan horse sent by Robert Sterling to get close to Julian, to uncover his secrets, to find a weakness that could be exploited in their corporate war. The implications were staggering. If this were true, Julian wasn't just a cheat, he was a fool. A man so blinded by his own arrogance and desire that he had walked willingly into a trap laid by his greatest enemy. The humiliation would be catastrophic, not just personally, but professionally. It could be the leverage Sterling needed to ruin him completely. A new chilling possibility emerged. What if Julian knew? What if this was some kind of twisted three-dimensional chess game he was playing, using his mistress as a double agent? It seemed too far-fetched, too much like fiction. Julian was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. Or was he? That evening, when Julian came home, Eleanor watched him with new eyes. She saw the stress lines around his mouth, the way he constantly checked his phone. She had attributed it to the pressure of the Sterling deal. Now she wondered what other secrets he was hiding. "Tough day?" she asked, her voice impossibly calm as she handed him a glass of whiskey. "You have no idea, Elle," he sighed, sinking into an armchair. "Sterling is playing dirty. It's like he knows my every move before I make it." The irony was so thick, Eleanor felt she could choke on it. He had no idea how right he was. The next day, Eleanor made a decision. She couldn't rely on Quinn's reports alone. She needed to see for herself. She needed to understand who this woman was. Following the location tracker on the Tesla app, she drove her own car, a discreet Range Rover, across the bridge to Dumbo. She parked across the street from the imposing brick warehouse that housed Russo Studios. Her heart pounded as she watched the entrance. After an hour, she saw him. Julian's Tesla pulled up and he got out looking more relaxed than she had seen him in months. A few moments later, Sophia Russo emerged from the building. She ran to him, jumping into his arms. He swung her around and their laughter carried across the street, a joyful, carefree sound that sliced right through Eleanor. They walked away hand in hand, disappearing into a nearby restaurant. They looked like any other couple in love. But Eleanor knew better. This was a charade, a lie, a dangerous game. And she was no longer content to be a spectator. The jealousy, the hurt, it was all still there. But now it was mixed with something else, a cold, terrifying clarity. This was bigger than her marriage. This was about the survival of everything they had built. As she sat there, cloaked in the anonymity of her car, a new resolve hardened within her. Confronting Julian was no longer enough. She had to get to the source of the rot. She had to confront the other woman. She needed to look Sophia Russo in the eye and find out if she was a lover, a pawn, or the architect of her husband's destruction. The confrontation wasn't going to be a screaming match on a street corner. Eleanor Vance did not engage in public spectacles. Her approach would be like her strategy in a high-stakes art auction, precise, calculated, and designed to seize control. She waited 3 days, a period of agonizing self-control, during which she instructed Martin Quinn to dig deeper into the Sterling-Russo connection. Quinn's next report contained the linchpin. Sophia's father, Marco Russo, had once owned a small but successful construction firm in Miami. 10 years ago, his company had been driven into bankruptcy after a hostile acquisition. The acquiring company, a subsidiary of Vance Development, led by a young, hungry Julian Vance on his ruthless climb to the top. The stress of the financial ruin had led to Marco Russo's fatal heart attack less than a year later. Suddenly, the picture snapped into horrifying focus. This wasn't about Robert Sterling, not directly. Sterling was likely just an opportunistic ally. This was about revenge. A daughter's long-game vendetta against the man who had destroyed her father. Julian wasn't just being played by a corporate rival's pawn. He was the target of a deeply personal, meticulously planned act of retribution. And he had invited his executioner into his bed. The knowledge was a poison and an antidote. The pain of the affair was now eclipsed by the terrifying scale of the deception. Eleanor felt a strange, chilling sense of detachment. She was no longer just the wronged wife. She was the only person who could see the full board. She chose her moment carefully. It was a Thursday afternoon. The Tesla app showed Julian's car parked at his downtown office, where he was in back-to-back meetings preparing for a final showdown with Sterling's board. He was distracted, fully engaged on the corporate front blind to the personal attack that was about to unfold. Eleanor drove her Range Rover back to Dumbo. She didn't wear Chanel or carry a Birkin bag. She was dressed in tailored black slacks, a silk blouse, and a simple trench coat. She looked elegant but formidable, like a woman coming to close a deal, not to have a breakdown. She buzzed the intercom for Russo Studios. "Yes?" A voice answered, wary and impatient. "Sophia Russo." Eleanor asked, her own voice, steady and clear. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I believe you have something that belongs to my husband. And I have some information that belongs to you." There was a long silence. Eleanor could picture the woman on the other end, her mind racing. Then a sharp click, and the heavy door buzzed open. Sophia Russo's studio was a vast open space with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the East River. Half-finished metal sculptures twisted and aggressive stood like sentinels. The air smelled of ozone from a welding torch and expensive coffee. Sophia stood in the center of the room wearing paint-splattered jeans and a tight black tank top. She had wiped the smile from her face. Up close, her intensity was even more palpable. She was beautiful, yes, but there was a hardness in her eyes, a predator's stillness. "You're brave," Sophia said, her voice a low, smoky purr. She gestured vaguely towards a stark leather sofa. "Or foolish." "I'm informed," Eleanor replied, ignoring the invitation to sit. She remained standing, forcing Sophia to look up at her. "I know about your father, Marco. I know what Julian did to his company in Miami." The slightest flicker of surprise crossed Sophia's face, instantly suppressed. The hunter was momentarily startled to find that the prey knew the rules of the game. "That was business," Sophia said, her tone dismissive. "Ancient history." "Was it business when you took money from Robert Sterling to get your start?" Eleanor pressed, her voice cutting through the pretense. "Or was that just a happy coincidence? Finding an ally who hated my husband as much as you did." Sophia let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sterling is a pig. He saw an opportunity. He thought I was his tool to get corporate secrets out of Julian. I let him think it. Men like Sterling and your husband are so blinded by their own arrogance, they can't imagine a woman having her own agenda." She walked over to a workbench, picking up a heavy wrench, turning it over in her hands. It was a subtle, menacing gesture. "Julian told me all about the waterfront deal. Every weakness, every over-leveraged position. I passed along just enough to Sterling to make him think I was on his side. But the real information, the kill shot, I was saving that for myself." Here was the first twist Eleanor hadn't fully anticipated. Sophia wasn't working for Sterling. She was playing him too. She was a lone wolf. "So this has all been for revenge," Eleanor stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "You seduce my husband. You bleed him for money to fund your art. You ruin his reputation, and you destroy his company from the inside. All for your father. He deserves it." Sophia spat, the polished veneer cracking to reveal the raw rage beneath. "He destroyed my family. He stood on my father's grave and called it a good investment. I'm just returning the favor. An eye for an eye, an empire for a family." She finally looked at Eleanor, a cruel pity in her eyes. "You're just collateral damage. I'm almost sorry for you. You have no idea who you're married to." "Oh, I think I'm beginning to understand him far better than you do," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She took a step closer. You think you're in control of this situation? You think you're the one holding all the cards, but you've made the same mistake Julian did. You've underestimated me. Eleanor opened her clutch and pulled out a single sheet of paper, placing it on a steel table between them. It was a wire transfer confirmation. A transfer for $10 million made that morning from one of Eleanor's personal trust accounts. Money Julian had never been able to touch, to an account belonging to a man named David Chin, a key board member at Sterling's company. Sophia stared at the paper confused. What is this? That Eleanor said is the price of loyalty. Mr. Chin was the deciding vote in the Sterling takeover bid. He was on the fence. Robert Sterling was offering him a future promotion. I offered him a comfortable retirement, effective immediately. The vote was this afternoon. While Julian has been running around trying to shore up his defenses, I've been on the offense. Sterling's takeover has been defeated. Your leverage, your kill shot, is now worthless. Sophia's face went pale. The confidence drained from her, replaced by disbelief, then fury. You did what I saved his company, Eleanor said, her voice cold as ice. Not for him. For me. It's my name on that letterhead too. My life's work. You think I'm going to let a spoiled, vindictive child burn it to the ground because of a decade-old grudge? You wanted to destroy his empire. I just bought it. The sound of the door buzzing violently cut through the tense silence. Both women froze. Through the intercom, a man's voice, panicked and enraged, echoed through the studio. Sophia, open this door! God damn it! Open the door now! It was Julian. Sophia looked at Eleanor, a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes for the first time. The game was over. The puppets were off their strings. He knows, Sophia whispered. Sterling must have called him. He told him about me. Before Eleanor could react, Sophia ran to the door and threw it open. Julian stormed in his face, a mask of purple fury. His eyes, wild and bloodshot, darted from Sophia to Eleanor. The carefully constructed compartments of his life had just collided and exploded. You, he seethed, pointing a trembling finger at Sophia. Sterling called me. He laughed. He told me everything. How his little artist had been playing me for a fool. He then turned on Eleanor, his rage now mixed with utter bewilderment. And you? What the hell are you doing here? How do you know about this? I know everything, Julian, Eleanor said calmly, her composure a stark contrast to his unhinged state. I know about the apartment, the money, the lies. I know about her father. I know more than you do. This is my fault, Sophia suddenly cried out, her voice taking on a desperate theatrical tone. It was a performance, and Eleanor realized with a jolt that she was trying to regain control. He forced me, Julian Sterling. He threatened me. He knew about my father's history with you, and he used it. He made me get close to you. It was a brilliant last-ditch lie, an attempt to paint herself as a victim to salvage something from the wreckage. But Julian wasn't listening. His world was crumbling. He had been betrayed by his lover, outmaneuvered by his wife, and humiliated by his rival. He was a titan, no more just a man drowning in the consequences of his own actions. He grabbed Sophia by the arm. You lying bitch, he roared. Julian, stop! Eleanor yelled, moving towards them. It was in that moment that the final catastrophic piece of the puzzle fell into place. As Julian lunged toward Sophia, his body knocked over one of her smaller metal sculptures from a pedestal near the door. It was a jagged, sharp piece of welded steel. It fell to the concrete floor with a deafening clang. But it wasn't the noise that made them all freeze. It was the small red light that was now blinking insistently from a device that had been hidden within the sculpture's base. A camera. They all stared at it in stunned silence. The fight. The accusations, the raw, unadulterated truth of their sordid triangle, it had all been happening in front of a lens. Sophia's face twisted into a grotesque smile, a look of triumphant, nihilistic victory. You think you won, she hissed at Eleanor, her voice dripping with venom. You just saved a company, I just destroyed a reputation. That camera has been live streaming to a private server for the last 10 minutes. By now the link has been sent to every major gossip columnist and news outlet in the city. Checkmate. The full horror of it descended on Eleanor. The fight, Julian's rage, her own cold pronouncements, all of it captured. It was a public relations apocalypse. Her move to save the company would be buried under the avalanche of the scandal. Julian Vance, the titan of industry, caught in a love triangle showdown with his wife and mistress. A mistress who was the daughter of a man he had ruined. It was a story too juicy, too perfect to ignore. Julian looked at the blinking red light, then at Sophia's triumphant face, and something inside him snapped. He let out a primal roar of fury and lunged not at Sophia, but towards the camera, as if by destroying the lens he could erase the last 10 minutes. But he was clumsy in his rage, tripping over another piece of metal on the floor. He fell hard, his head connecting with the corner of a heavy steel workbench with a sickening crack. He lay still on the floor, a pool of blood beginning to spread out from under his head onto the cold concrete of the studio. Silence. The only sound was the insistent, silent blinking of the little red light, recording it all. The piercing wail of sirens growing closer was the sound of Eleanor Vance's old life ending. The moments after Julian's fall were a blur of surreal horror. Sophia, her triumphant smirk vanished and replaced with a mask of shock, had fumbled for her phone to call 911, her voice a high-pitched, panicked squeak. Eleanor had simply stood there, frozen, staring at the blinking red light of the camera, a malevolent digital eye that had just broadcast their downfall to the world. When the paramedics and police arrived, the scene was one of controlled chaos. They swarmed the studio, their movements efficient and impersonal. Eleanor watched as they worked on Julian, his face pale and slack against the blood-stained concrete. She felt a profound and unsettling detachment, as if she were watching a particularly grim television drama. The man on the floor was her husband, yet he was also a stranger, the architect of this entire catastrophe. At the hospital, a place of antiseptic smells and hushed, anxious whispers, she was given the news by a tired-looking doctor. Julian had a severe traumatic brain injury. He was alive, but he was in a coma. There was swelling bleeding. The next 72 hours were critical. The words were clinical, detached, but their meaning was a life sentence. The vibrant, charismatic, monstrous man she had married was gone, replaced by a still form tethered to a bank of beeping machines. The public fallout was instantaneous and brutal. Just as Sophia had promised, the video spread like wildfire. It was on every gossip blog, every news site, every social media feed under salacious headlines: Vance's vendetta, millionaire meltdown, wife mistress, and a bloody finale. The narrative was irresistible: the powerful tycoon, his elegant wife; the vengeful artist, mistress; the secret history; the violent confrontation. It was a Shakespearean tragedy played out in a Dumbo loft. Eleanor's carefully orchestrated move to save the company was now a mere footnote in the sordid tale. Instead of being lauded as a brilliant strategist, she was cast as the tragic Ice Queen wife. Sophia, despite her obvious manipulations, garnered a bizarre form of public sympathy in some circles, the wronged daughter who had taken on a corrupt titan. She gave a single tearful interview painting herself as a victim of both Julian's advances and Robert Sterling's schemes before disappearing from public view. The board of directors of Vance Development, the very people whose company Eleanor had just saved, acted swiftly. Citing the morals clause in Julian's contract and the catastrophic damage to the company's reputation, they called an emergency meeting. Eleanor, as a major shareholder and Julian's legal proxy, was summoned. She walked into the boardroom with her head held high, ignoring the whispers and averted gazes. The room was filled with men in expensive suits, men who had eaten at her table and praised her husband's genius. Now they looked at her with a mixture of pity and fear. They weren't concerned for Julian's health or her well-being. They were concerned for the stock price. The chairman of the board, a man named Arthur Kensington, a longtime family friend, got straight to the point. "Eleanor, this is a disaster of unprecedented proportions. The lenders are spooked, our partners are threatening to pull out. The brand is toxic. I saved the company from a hostile takeover less than 24 hours ago. Arthur Eleanor stated, her voice quiet but firm. And we are grateful for that. Kensington said, the words ringing hollow. But the situation has changed. The board has voted. For the stability of the company, we are exercising our right to remove Julian as CEO. And we are activating the buyout clause on your shared family stock. We'll pay a premium, of course. It's better for everyone if the Vance name is completely dissociated from the company moving forward. It was a public execution delivered with polite corporate regret. They were erasing them. They were taking the empire Julian had built. The empire she had sacrificed everything for, and cutting them out like a cancer. They were using her $10 million move as the very bridge to their own survival, then burning that bridge behind them. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. She didn't fight them. She simply nodded, signed the papers with a steady hand, and walked out, leaving the world of Vance Development behind her forever. She was now officially a very wealthy divorcee-in-waiting, the wife of a comatose man and a public spectacle. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor retreated. She sold the Hamptons estate and the Aspen chalet. She moved out of the penthouse, that monument to a life that was now a lie, and into a discreet, elegant brownstone in the West Village that she purchased with her own trust money. She was surrounded by boxes, the artifacts of a shared past she no longer wanted. Her old life vanished. The invitations stopped. The friends who had once clamored for a place at her dinner table now crossed the street to avoid her. She was a pariah, a living embodiment of a scandal they didn't want to touch. The loneliness was profound, a heavy silence in the beautiful empty rooms of her new home. But in that silence something began to shift. The grief for her marriage had been purged in the fire of Julian's betrayal. The shock was slowly giving way to a quiet, steely resolve. For 15 years her identity had been Julian Vance's wife. She had curated his life, his homes, his social standing. Now stripped of all that, she was forced to ask a question she hadn't considered in years. Who was Eleanor? She found the answer in an old, dusty portfolio case in the back of a storage unit. Inside were her sketches and dissertations from her time at Sotheby's, drawings of gallery layouts, proposals for exhibitions, passionate essays on the revolutionary power of post-war art. It was a ghost of the woman she had been, the woman she had buried alive to become Mrs. Vance. She started small. She visited galleries not as a patron but as a student. She went to lectures at the Met. She reconnected with a few old contacts from her university days, people who knew her not as a socialite, but as a talented curator with a brilliant eye. The art world she discovered was less concerned with her scandalous notoriety and more interested in her knowledge and, more importantly, her money. She decided to start her own art consultancy firm. It would be a small, bespoke service helping new collectors navigate the often opaque art market. It was a way to reclaim her past, to rebuild an identity on her own terms. One crisp autumn afternoon, she was meeting with her lawyer to finalize the paperwork for her new company. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright, was reviewing the final documents from the Vance Development buyout. "It's all in order," Ms. Albright said. "The funds have been transferred to your private accounts. A clean break." She paused, pushing a stray document across the table. "There is one final piece of a correspondence I thought you should see. It came from the forensic accounting team that was unwinding Julian's personal corporate structures. It's unusual." Eleanor picked up the paper. It was a copy of a highly encrypted email recovered from a wiped hard drive in Julian's office. The email was dated the day before the disastrous confrontation in the studio. It was from a sender she didn't recognize, but the recipient was clear: Julian Vance. The message was short, just 2 sentences. "She served her purpose. The board is ready to move when you give the signal. Your friend has the final vote secured." Eleanor stared at the words, her blood turning to ice. She served her purpose. "Sophia, the board is ready to move. The Vance Development Board. Your friend has the final vote secured. It didn't make any sense. Julian had been fighting the board, fighting Sterling. Why would he be coordinating with them? And then she saw the sender's email address. It was a string of meaningless letters and numbers, a burner account. But Martin Quinn, her investigator, was a ghost who knew how to unmask other ghosts. She knew with a sickening certainty that he could trace it. A final horrifying twist of the knife was coming. The drama wasn't over. The true puppet master had not yet been revealed. Julian's fall, she realized, might not have been an accident at all. It might have been the final move in a game she was only just beginning to comprehend. The encrypted email was a loose thread in a tapestry of deceit she had thought was complete. Eleanor immediately sent a copy to Martin Quinn. His reply came less than 12 hours later, and it shattered the final illusions she had about her past life. The burner email address, after being funneled through half a dozen international servers, had originated from a computer registered to the private office of one man, Arthur Kensington. Arthur Kensington, the chairman of the board, the man who had been Julian's mentor, the kind, avuncular figure who had bounced their non-existent children on his knee at Christmas parties, the family friend who had so regretfully informed her that the board was cutting her and Julian out. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. She read the cryptic email again, this time with the knowledge of its sender. She served her purpose. Arthur had known about Sophia. The board is ready to move when you give the signal. The signal for what? To remove Julian as CEO. Your friend has the final vote secured. This wasn't about David Chen, the man Eleanor had paid off. This referred to a different vote, a vote of no confidence in Julian. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a story about a wife, a husband, and a mistress. It was a corporate coup orchestrated from the inside by their most trusted friend. Robert Sterling's takeover bid hadn't been a genuine threat. It had been a smokescreen. Arthur Kensington had likely encouraged it, fanning the flames of Julian's rivalry to keep him distracted. Sophia Russo wasn't just a vengeful daughter. She was a pawn, but not Sterling's pawn. She was Arthur's. He must have found her, learned her history, and funded her, setting her on Julian like an attack dog. Her mission was never to steal corporate secrets for Sterling. It was to create a public scandal so immense, so toxic, that the board would have no choice but to oust their brilliant but volatile founder. Julian, in his arrogance, had thought he was playing a game with Sophia and Sterling. In reality, he was a puppet, and Arthur was pulling all the strings. The final damning email confirmed it. Julian had, at the last minute, realized what was happening. He must have confronted Arthur, who then sent that email as a final taunt. Julian's panicked rush to the studio wasn't just to confront Sophia. It was a desperate last-ditch attempt to stop the scandal he knew Arthur was about to unleash. The entire affair, the heartbreak, the public humiliation, it had all been manufactured. It was the moral justification Arthur needed to seize control of the company Julian had built. He hadn't just stolen Julian's company. He had orchestrated the complete annihilation of his life to do it. Eleanor sat in her quiet brownstone, the city lights twinkling outside her window, and felt a rage so pure and cold, it was almost serene. They had all underestimated her. Julian with his casual betrayals, Sophia with her myopic revenge plot, and Arthur, the most dangerous of them all, who saw her as nothing more than a decorative piece of collateral damage. She thought about the blinking red light of the camera. Sophia had thought it was her checkmate, but what if it was Eleanor's opening move? She called Martin Quinn. "I need you to find Sophia Russo," she said, her voice devoid of any tremor. "And I need everything you have on Arthur Kensington's financial dealings for the past 5 years. I want to know where every single dollar is buried." Quinn found Sophia living in a small, nondescript apartment in Queens, paid for in cash. The art career was over, the revenge a hollow victory that had left her with nothing. Eleanor went to her alone. Sophia opened the door, looking sallow and defeated. When she saw Eleanor, she tried to slam it shut, but Eleanor was faster, blocking it with her foot. "I'm not here to fight, Sophia," Eleanor said. I'm here to offer you a choice." She laid it all out. The emails, Arthur Kensington's betrayal, the fact that he had used Sophia's quest for vengeance for his own grubby corporate ambitions. He had used her father's memory as a tool. "He played you just as much as he played Julian," Eleanor finished. "You got your revenge, and what did it get you? Hiding in this apartment while he's sitting in Julian's office running the empire, your father's memory helped him steal." She saw the flicker of rage return to Sophia's eyes, this time directed at a new target. "What choice?" Sophia asked, her voice raspy. "You can stay here and fade into obscurity," Eleanor said, "or you can help me burn him to the ground." The final act was a masterpiece of coordinated destruction. Sophia, armed with bank records and correspondence provided by Arthur during their patronage, filed a lawsuit against him and the board of Vance Development. She claimed emotional distress manipulation and detailed how Arthur Kensington had orchestrated the entire affair, using her as an unwitting pawn in his corporate coup. It was a lie, of course. She had been a very willing pawn, but it was a plausible lie that reeked of scandal. Simultaneously, Martin Quinn's investigation had borne fruit. He'd uncovered a pattern of insider trading and financial malfeasance in Arthur's past, small enough to have gone unnoticed, but damning when compiled into a single anonymous dossier that Eleanor had delivered to the SEC and the New York Times. The story exploded. It was even bigger than the first scandal. The heroic chairman who had saved the company was revealed to be a manipulative fraudster. The stock of Vance Development, now Kensington Development, plummeted. The board, facing federal investigations and shareholder lawsuits, turned on Arthur with the same ruthless efficiency they had shown Julian. Eleanor watched the fallout from a distance. She watched as Arthur Kensington was forced to resign in disgrace, his reputation in tatters. She watched as the company he had stolen was carved up and sold for parts. The Vance empire was well and truly dead, reduced to a pile of ashes. One afternoon she visited Julian in the long-term care facility. He was out of the coma, but the man she knew was gone forever. He had significant cognitive and memory deficits. He looked at her with a vague, placid confusion, not recognizing the woman who had been his wife, his partner, his enemy, and in the end, his avenger. There was no victory in looking at him, only a profound, hollow sadness for the life they had both lost. She left the facility and walked out into the bright sunshine. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a gallery owner confirming the successful sale of a painting for one of her new clients. Her consultancy was thriving. She was making a name for herself, her name. She had lost a husband, a life, and an empire, but in the ashes she had found something she hadn't realized was missing herself. Eleanor Vance was no longer just a millionaire's wife. She was the architect of her own life, a survivor who had looked into the abyss of betrayal and clawed her way back, not with vengeance as her goal, but with reclamation. The game was over. She had won. So what happens when the perfect life reveals itself to be the perfect lie? For Eleanor Vance, it meant walking through the fire of betrayal and coming out not burned, but forged into something stronger. She lost an empire built on secrets and lies, but in its place, she built a life of her own making, founded on her own strength and her own name. Her story is a chilling reminder that the most dangerous secrets often hide behind the most polished smiles, and that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the one you should fear the most. The men in her life, her husband, his rival, their friend, all thought they were in control. They all underestimated the millionaire's wife, and they all paid the price. If Eleanor's incredible journey from betrayal to triumph shocked you, make sure to hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves a real-life drama with twists they'll never see coming. The hum of the ultrasound machine was supposed to be the soundtrack to the happiest day of her life. They were about to see their baby for the first time. Her husband, Torrin, a man who could buy cities, held her hand, his grip like ice. As the doctor showed them the tiny beating heart, he leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for her. What a mistake. He thought his secret was safe. He thought his money could bury the truth. But he never counted on the doctor in that room, a woman who saw more than just a picture on a screen. She saw his lie, and she was about to reveal a shocking truth that would shatter a gilded world forever. The silence in the Bentley was a familiar character in their marriage. It was a heavy, opulent silence, cushioned by hand-stitched leather and the whisper-quiet engine, but a silence nonetheless. Torrin Hawthorne, her husband of 3 years, drove with an unnerving stillness, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked streets of New York City. His profile, sharp and handsome like a Roman coin, was a mask of serene indifference. To the outside world, he was a titan of industry, the brilliant CEO of Hawthorne Holdings, a man whose Midas touch turned every venture into gold. To Katya, he was becoming a beautiful, unknowable stranger. Their home, a sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue that Torrin called the Observatory, for its floor-to-ceiling windows felt less like a home and more like a museum. Every piece of art, every piece of furniture had been chosen by him. Her life, she was beginning to realize, had also been curated. She had been a promising art historian at the Met when they met. He had swept her off her feet with a whirlwind romance that felt like a fairy tale, dinners in Paris, surprise trips to see the Northern Lights, a blinding diamond that felt more like a beautiful handcuff. He had convinced her to leave her job. An artist needs a patron, Katya, he'd said, and a historian needs to be surrounded by history in the making. Your work is me now. It's us. And she, blinded by love and the sheer force of his personality, had agreed. Now her days were a structured series of luncheons with the wives of his business associates, charity galas, where her only role was to smile, and where his chosen designer, and long quiet afternoons, staring out at a city she lived in but no longer felt a part of. The pregnancy had been her idea, a desperate attempt to build a bridge across the growing chasm between them. She thought a baby, a piece of both of them, would force him to see her again, not just the polished accessory on his arm. When she told him, his reaction was muted. A flicker of something unreadable in his cool gray eyes, a tight smile. A Hawthorne air, he'd said the words tasting of legacy and lineage, not love and joy. We'll need to adjust the nursery plans. The ride to the renowned obstetrician Dr. Anya Sharma was no different. He hadn't wanted to come. It's the 20-week scan, Torrin, she had pleaded. We'll find out the gender. It's important. He had sighed, a long-suffering sound. I have the merger with Sterling Thorne, Katya. It's a delicate phase. This is more important than Sterling Thorne. She had said, a rare spark of defiance flashing within her. His jaw had tightened. Fine. I'll move my meeting with Mr. Sterling. But let's be efficient. Now in the sterile, quiet room, the scent of antiseptic cleaner sharp in the air, that efficiency was all he radiated. He checked his Patek Philippe watch twice while the technician prepped her. Katya lay on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her, her stomach bare and covered in a cold, clear gel. Dr. Sharma entered with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was a sharp, observant woman in her late 40s with a reputation for being one of the best. Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne. Ready for the big show. Ready as we'll ever be, Katya said, trying to inject some lightness into the room. Torrin simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the large monitor. The technician, a young woman named Chloe, moved the transducer across Katya's belly. A monochrome world swirled into existence on the screen. It was abstract at first, a collection of shadows and light. Then Chloe pointed, and there we are. See that little flicker? That's the heartbeat. Strong and steady. Tears instantly welled in Katya's eyes. A tiny pulsating light in the darkness. It was real. A life. Her baby. She turned to Torrin, her heart overflowing, expecting to see a reflection of her own awe. His face was stone. He wasn't looking at the heartbeat. He was looking at the vague outline of a tiny head, the curve of a minuscule spine. His hand, which had been resting limply on hers, tightened. She thought it was a gesture of shared emotion until he leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. The warmth of his breath was a stark contrast to the icy cruelty of his words. It's a mistake. The whisper was so low, so venomous, it was like a snake bite. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd misheard. The hum of the machine, the doctor's cheerful commentary, surely she'd imagined it. But then she saw the subtle shift in his jaw, the cold finality in his eyes as he looked away from the screen and stared at a blank spot on the wall. He had said it. He had looked at their child, their miracle, and declared it a mistake. The air rushed out of her lungs. The tears that had been tears of joy turned to ash, burning her cheeks. Her hand went cold in his. The room which had felt full of life and promise a moment before was suddenly a tomb. Dr. Sharma and Chloe were oblivious, their professional chatter filling the void. Everything looks perfect, Katya. Limbs are all there. Measurements are right on track. Do you want to know the gender? Her voice was a strangled whisper. I don't know. Torin released her hand and stood up, smoothing his bespoke suit jacket. I have to take a call. The Sterling-Thorne merger won't wait. He looked at Dr. Sharma, a mask of polite apology firmly in place. Doctor, please send the bill to my office. Katya, my driver, Thomas, will take you home. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at the screen again. He just walked out, leaving her half-naked on a paper-lined table with the ghost of his words echoing in the silent spaces of her heart. A mistake. Her baby. Their baby. A mistake. Dr. Sharma's cheerful demeanor had vanished. She looked from the empty doorway back to Katya's tear-streaked face. She turned to Chloe. Chloe, could you give Mrs. Hawthorne some privacy to get dressed? And please hold all my calls for the next 15 minutes. Once Chloe had left Dr. Chasur, Sharma pulled a stool over her expression, a mixture of professional concern and something deeper. Something intensely human. She saw the devastation. She had to have seen Torin's chilling detachment. Katya, she said softly, her voice a lifeline. Deep breaths. Can you tell me what happened just now? Katya shook her head, a sob catching in her throat. He said. She couldn't repeat it. Saying it out loud would make it irrevocably real. Dr. Sharma didn't press. She simply placed a comforting hand on Katya's arm. Torin's reaction was unusual, especially for a first-time father. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, held Katya's. I have been a patient of the Hawthorne family's preferred hospital network for years. Torin's medical file is extensive. I took the liberty of reviewing it before this appointment as a matter of due diligence. Katya frowned, confused. His medical file, why, doctor? Sharma hesitated, as if weighing her next words on a scale of professional ethics versus human decency. There was a notation from his primary care physician, a Dr. Alistair Finch, to cross-reference his records with any spousal maternity care. It was an odd flag, so I looked into it. She took a deep breath. Katya, what I'm about to tell you is a serious breach of patient confidentiality. But given what I just witnessed, I believe it is a matter of your safety and well-being. A cold dread far colder than the ultrasound gel seeped into Katya's bones. What is it? Torin had a severe case of mumps as a teenager? She began, her voice low and steady. It was complicated by a condition called orchitis, inflammation of the testicles. The medical terms meant little to Katya. She was still stuck on the word mistake. The inflammation caused significant irreparable damage. Dr. Sharma continued, her gaze unwavering. We ran a series of tests on him afterward. I have the records here. Katya, Torin Hawthorne is and has been since he was 16 years old completely and irreversibly sterile. His condition is called azoospermia. There is a 0% chance that he can conceive a child naturally. The room began to spin. The black and white image of her baby on the screen seemed to mock her. 0% chance. Sterile. Irreversible. What are you saying? She stammered, her mind refusing to connect the dots. Dr. Sharma's voice was gentle, but her words were devastatingly clear. I'm saying, Katya, that Torin knows he cannot be the father of your baby. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a gunshot. His muted reaction to the pregnancy, his distance, his controlling nature, and the whisper. It's a mistake. The mistake wasn't the baby. The mistake wasn't the pregnancy. The mistake was that she had gotten pregnant at all. Because he knew with absolute scientific certainty that he wasn't the father. He hadn't been accusing the baby of being a mistake. He had been accusing her. The drive home from Dr. Sharma's office was a blur. Thomas Torran's stoic driver navigated through the city traffic with his usual silent competence, occasionally glancing at Katya in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with what might have been concern. She sat numbly in the back of the Bentley, the plush leather feeling like a cage. Her hand rested protectively on her belly, a gesture that was now fraught with a terrifying new meaning. Dr. Sharma's words echoed in her mind, a relentless, deafening drumbeat. Sterile. Irreversible. 0% chance. The doctor had been kind. She had given Katya a glass of water, a box of tissues, and the space to let the initial shock wash over her. She had also given her a warning. A man like Torran Hawthorne with his resources and his pride. He will not take this revelation lightly, Katya. He is not a man who likes his narrative to be challenged. Be careful. She had printed a copy of the diagnostic report from Torran's file, a document dated over a decade ago, signed by a Dr. Alistair Finch, detailing the diagnosis of azoospermia. Proof is your only power now, she'd said, sliding it into a plain manila envelope. Guard this with your life. Back in the sterile perfection of the observatory, Katya walked through the cavernous living room like a ghost. The Warhol prints on the wall seemed to scream in silent mockery. The cityscape outside, usually a source of comfort, felt alien and menacing. Her whole life, this beautiful, curated life, was a lie, a meticulously constructed sham. She had not cheated on Torran. Not once. The very idea was absurd. She loved him, or she had loved the man she thought he was. Her mind raced frantically, trying to find an explanation. Any explanation other than the one staring her in the face. A miracle. A misdiagnosis. A 1 in a billion chance. But Dr. Sharma's certainty had been absolute. The proof was in the envelope clutched in her hand. If she hadn't cheated and he was sterile, then how was she pregnant? The question was a black hole threatening to swallow her whole. Torran came home late that evening. She heard his keys in the door, the soft click as he locked it behind him. She was sitting in the dark, the envelope on the marble coffee table in front of her. She hadn't moved for hours. He switched on a low lamp and the room was bathed in a soft golden glow. He loosened his tie, his movements fluid and confident. Katya. Why are you sitting in the dark? He didn't sound angry, just weary. The powerful CEO home from a long day of empire building. We need to talk, Torran, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. Can it wait? The Sterling Thorne deal is at a critical juncture. I'm exhausted. No, she said, her voice gaining strength. It can't wait. She gestured to the envelope. I had a very enlightening conversation with Dr. Sharma today, after you left. A flicker of something anger, fear crossed his face before being instantly suppressed, replaced by a look of paternalistic concern. He walked over and sat in the armchair opposite her, creating a deliberate distance between them. Are you all right? Is the baby okay? You seemed overwrought at the clinic. The casual cruelty of his words, the way he pretended her distress was just hormonal imbalance, ignited a fire in her chest. The baby is fine. But you know that, don't you? You saw the heartbeat. You also called our baby a mistake. He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. Katya, you misheard. The room was noisy. I was talking about the merger. Don't lie to me, Torran, she said, her voice rising. Don't you dare lie to me. I heard you perfectly, and now I know why you said it. She pushed the envelope across the table. Dr. Sharma showed me this. Your medical file. From when you were 16. He glanced at the envelope but didn't touch it. A slow, cold smile spread across his lips, and the mask of the concerned husband dissolved, revealing the monster beneath. It was a chilling transformation. Dr. Sharma seems to have a problem with patient confidentiality, he said smoothly, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. I'll have my legal team address that with the hospital board. She'll be lucky to practice medicine in this state again. This isn't about Dr. Sharma. This is about you, about us. Katya was on her feet now, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. You're sterile, Torin. You have been for years. You knew you couldn't be this baby's father. You let me believe. You let me think I was going crazy. Why? He stood up, his height and presence suddenly overwhelming in the dimly lit room. He was no longer the charming man she had married. He was a predator. I didn't let you believe anything, Katya, he purred, taking a step towards her. I reacted to a simple biological fact. You came to me, told me you were pregnant. I am your husband. What was I to conclude? The implication hit her like a physical blow. You think I cheated on you. He gave a small, dismissive shrug. The science is quite clear. I cannot have children. You are having a child. The conclusion is elementary, my dear. I was willing for the sake of appearances to overlook your indiscretion, to raise the child as my own, to give it the Hawthorne name, the Hawthorne legacy. All I asked for was your discretion. But you couldn't even manage that. You had to create this drama. It was gaslighting of the highest order. So complete, so audacious that for a moment she almost questioned her own reality. He was twisting her fidelity into a betrayal, her joy into a scandal. He was painting himself as the magnanimous, cuckolded husband willing to forgive her transgression for the sake of his name. The mistake he'd referred to wasn't just her pregnancy, it was her failure to keep the secret of her affair. I never cheated on you, she whispered, horrified. I would never. Then how do you explain it? He shot back, his voice like a whip. A divine, immaculate conception. Did an angel visit you while I was closing the deal in Tokyo? Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. I don't know. That's what I'm asking you, but I know I was faithful to you. He laughed, a short, ugly sound devoid of humor. Fidelity, a quaint concept. It doesn't matter anymore. You've made it matter. By bringing this out into the open, you've forced my hand. He walked to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, his back to her. You will carry this child. When it is born, you will sign over all parental rights to me. I will have a non-disclosure agreement drawn up, a very generous one. You will be well compensated for your services. Then you will disappear. You will move to Europe or California, I don't care. You will never contact me or the child again. Katya stared at him aghast. You want to buy my baby? You want me to give you my child and just leave? It's not your child, he said, turning to face her, his eyes like chips of ice. Genetically, it is half yours. But it will be a Hawthorne. It will be raised as my heir. You are merely the vessel, a very beautiful but ultimately disappointing vessel. The cruelty was breathtaking. He was systematically dismantling her identity, wife, partner, and now mother. She was nothing to him but a means to an end, an incubator for an heir he desperately needed but couldn't produce himself. Her mind reeled back to the central, impossible question. If she hadn't cheated and he was sterile, the answer had to lie somewhere in the space between those two truths. And Torin, in his arrogance, had just given her a clue. He wasn't surprised by the pregnancy. He was angry it had become complicated. He had a plan already in place. This wasn't a shock to him. This was an inconvenience. Her fear began to morph into something else. A cold, hard resolve. He was a liar. He was a manipulator. And he had underestimated her. No, she said the word tasting of newfound power. He raised an eyebrow. No, no. I will not give you my child. I will not disappear. And I will find out the truth. For the first time since she'd met him, Torin Hawthorne looked genuinely surprised. He studied her for a long moment, a predator reassessing its prey. Then he smiled again, that same chilling, empty smile. "You have nothing, Katya," he said softly. "You signed a prenuptial agreement that leaves you with exactly what you came with, which was nothing. You have no job. Your friends are my friends. Your family is—" "Where exactly?" "That brother you never speak to. You live in my home. You eat my food. You wear my clothes. You are nothing without me. Do not make the mistake of thinking you can fight me. It's a battle you will lose. Miserably." He finished his whiskey and placed the glass down with a decisive click. "The offer stands until the day you give birth. Think carefully about your next move, because I will be thinking about mine." He walked out of the room, leaving her alone in the silence. But this time the silence was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the clarion call of war. He was right about one thing. She had a brother. A brother she hadn't spoken to in years because he'd seen the monster in Torin long before she had. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone. She scrolled through the contacts past the names of society wives and charity organizers until she found the one she was looking for: Liam Vance, her estranged, brilliant lawyer brother, her only hope. She pressed the call button, her heart pounding against her ribs. He answered on the second ring. "Katya." His voice was full of surprise. They hadn't spoken since her wedding day, when he'd pulled her aside and begged her not to marry Torin. "He's a shark, Katya. He'll eat you alive." She had called him jealous and dramatic. "Liam," she sobbed, the dam of her composure finally breaking. "Liam, I need your help." "You were right. You were right about everything." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of a chair scraping against a floor. "Katya." "What's wrong? Where are you?" Liam's voice had shed its surprise and was now sharp with concern. "I'm at home." "At the penthouse," she choked out between sobs. "Liam, I'm in trouble. I'm pregnant and Torin—" "I'm on my way," he cut in. No hesitation. "Don't say anything else over the phone. Are you safe right now?" "Is he there?" "He's here, but in his study." "I'm okay for now. Lock your bedroom door. Don't talk to him. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Just hang on, Katya. I'm coming." The line went dead. For the first time in hours, a tiny sliver of hope pierced through Katya's terror. Liam had always been her protector. Growing up, he was the one who'd patched up her scraped knees and stood up to bullies. He'd gone to Columbia Law while she'd pursued art history at NYU. Their paths diverged, but the bond had been unbreakable until Torin had systematically severed it, framing Liam's protectiveness as jealousy and disapproval of his wealth. "He can't stand to see you happy, Katya," Torin had said, and she, a fool, had believed him. True to his word, 30 minutes later the intercom buzzed. It was the front desk. "Mr. Hawthorne, a Mr. Liam Vance is here to see you." The doorman, of course, assumed Liam was here to see the man of the house. Torin's voice came over the internal speaker, cold and clipped. "I'm not expecting a Mr. Vance. Send him away." Her blood ran cold. He was trying to isolate her completely. She grabbed her phone and texted Liam frantically. "He won't let you up. He's trying to block me in." Liam's reply was almost instant. "Go to the service elevator at the end of the hall. Now!" Her heart hammered against her ribs. The service elevator was used by catering staff and maintenance. Torin would never think to monitor it. She slipped out of the living room, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floors. She could hear Torin on a phone call in his study, his voice a low, angry murmur. She crept down the long hallway past the gallery of curated art, her hand still protectively on her belly. The service elevator was utilitarian and stark. She jabbed the button and prayed. The doors slid open with a quiet hum, and there stood Liam. He looked older than she remembered. His sandy hair was a little shorter, and there were fine lines around his eyes. But those eyes were the same, fiercely intelligent and full of a protective warmth that she suddenly realized she had been starved of for 3 years. He pulled her into a hug and she clung to him, the sobs she'd been suppressing finally breaking free. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I've got you. Let's get out of here." They rode the elevator down in silence. He led her out a back exit into a grimy alley she'd never known existed, a world away from the polished lobby of Park Avenue. The cold night air was a shock to her system. He hailed a yellow cab and soon they were speeding away, the glittering lights of her prison shrinking in the distance. Liam's apartment in Greenwich Village was the complete antithesis of her penthouse. It was cluttered with books, legal pads, and a friendly-looking ficus tree. It smelled of coffee and old paper. It felt real. He sat her down on a worn leather sofa, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and made her a cup of tea. As she sipped the hot, sweet liquid, the story came tumbling out. She told him everything. The ultrasound, Torrens' whisper, Dr. Sharma's revelation, the medical report which she'd had the presence of mind to shove into her purse, the horrifying confrontation, the gaslighting Torrens' ultimatum to take her baby and disappear. Liam listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with every word. He took the medical report and read it carefully, his lawyerly gaze missing nothing. When she was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "That son of a bitch," he said, his voice a low growl. "I knew he was a controlling bastard, but this is sociopathic." He looked at her, his eyes full of a pain that mirrored her own. "Katya, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for you." "It's not your fault," she whispered. "He's a master manipulator. He isolated me and I let him." Liam shook his head. "No more. That ends tonight. First things first, he can't force you to give up your child. Parental rights are not a commodity to be bought and sold. His threats are designed to terrorize you into submission. But he has so much power, Liam. The best lawyers, the judges. He told me he'd ruin Dr. Sharma." "He'll try," Liam said, his jaw tight. "But Dr. Sharma has ethics on her side, and a good lawyer, which I will make sure she has, can argue that her duty of care to you, a patient in clear distress, superseded her duty of confidentiality to him, especially when he was using that confidentiality to perpetrate fraud and emotional abuse." He started pacing his mind, clearly working. "The prenup is another issue. Torrens' legal team is the best money can buy. They would have made it ironclad. He's right that you'd likely walk away with very little. But we're not going after his money. We're going for something more important, your freedom, your child, and the truth." He stopped and looked at her. "Katya, this is critical. You said you never cheated." "Never," she said with absolute conviction. "I believe you," he said immediately. "Which leaves a gaping hole in the middle of this. You are pregnant. He is sterile. He knew he was sterile. Yet he wasn't entirely surprised by the pregnancy. He was just angry it became public knowledge between you. He already had a plan to take the baby. This suggests he was expecting a child. Just not in this messy way." Her own thoughts, which had been a chaotic storm, began to clear as Liam laid them out with such logical precision. He was expecting a child. She repeated the idea, solidifying. "So, how?" "There are ways," Liam said, starting to list them on his fingers. "Surrogacy, for one. But you're the one who's pregnant, so that's out. Adoption possible, but the timeline doesn't fit. That leaves assisted reproductive technology. IVF. The acronym hung in the air. In vitro fertilization. But IVF, with what she asked, confused. His sperm is non-viable." "Exactly," Liam said, his eyes gleaming with a hunter's intensity. "It would have to be with donor sperm." "But you would know if you went through an IVF cycle, Katya. The hormone injections, the procedures. You'd know." She shook her head. "No, nothing like that ever happened." They were silent for a moment, both staring at the impossible puzzle. A pregnancy without intercourse with a fertile partner, and without a clinical IVF procedure. It made no sense. Unless, Liam began slowly, his eyes narrowing. Unless the insemination happened without your knowledge. The blood drained from her face. What? How is that even possible? I don't know, he admitted. It sounds like something out of a spy novel. But with a man like Torin, a man with infinite resources and a complete lack of a moral compass, we can't rule anything out. We have to start thinking like he does. Where are the vulnerabilities? Where could he have intervened? He grabbed a legal pad and a pen. Okay, let's be systematic. Think back. Katya, any unusual medical appointments? Procedures? Even a routine checkup that felt off? Any new vitamins or medications he insisted you take? She racked her brain, replaying the last 9 months in her head. Torin was obsessed with their health, but she had always seen it as part of his controlling nature. He'd switched her gynecologist about a year ago to a private clinic. He'd vetted a place called the Westwood Wellness Clinic, run by a Dr. Lena Hansen. It was exclusive, expensive, and catered to the city's elite. She'd had her annual checkup there. There was my annual pap smear at the Westwood Clinic, she said slowly. About 9 months ago. It was routine. Dr. Hansen was very professional, very slick. Anything else? Torin started me on a new regimen of prenatal vitamins about a month before that, she recalled. He had them specially formulated by a compounding pharmacy in Switzerland. He said they were the purest, most effective ones available. Liam wrote it all down. Westwood Wellness Clinic, Dr. Lena Hansen, Swiss vitamins. He looked up at her. It's a long shot, Katya, but this is where we start digging. We need to find out who owns Westwood, who Dr. Hansen is connected to, and we need to get our hands on one of those vitamin bottles. He looked at the blanket draped over her, at her exhausted, tear-stained face. His expression softened. But first you need to rest. You're safe here. Torin doesn't know this address. I moved 3 years ago after the wedding. The unspoken words hung in the air after she chose him over her brother. Tomorrow, Liam said, his voice firm with resolve, we start fighting back, and our first objective is a strategic retreat. You can't go back to the penthouse. We need to get your essential belongings, your passport, your personal documents, anything of sentimental value. We have to do it fast before he realizes you've bolted and locks everything down. The thought of going back into that gilded cage even for a moment filled her with dread. But Liam was right. She couldn't let Torin erase every trace of her existence. He'll be at his office all morning, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He has a board meeting. He'll be gone from 8 a.m. to at least noon. Liam nodded. Okay, we have a 4-hour window. We go in, we get your things, and we get out. And then we disappear while I start digging into Mr. Torin Hawthorne's beautifully curated world. I have a feeling we're about to find some very ugly secrets hidden in the fine print. That night, huddled on Liam's sofa, Katya finally slept. It was a restless sleep, punctuated by nightmares of cold whispers and icy smiles. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone in the dark. She had an ally, and they had a plan. The great Torin Hawthorne had made a critical error. He had pushed her so far that she had nothing left to lose, and in doing so, he had transformed his polished, docile wife into an adversary. He had no idea the war he had just started. The next morning, the city was shrouded in a gray, determined drizzle that matched Katya's mood. Liam had already been up for hours, a pot of strong coffee brewing, his laptop open on the dining table, which was now Command Central. I did a preliminary search on the Westwood Wellness Clinic, he said, handing her a mug. It's a private entity owned by a holding company called Ethelred Capital. Very opaque. But I found something interesting. The listed agent for Ethelred is a law firm, Sloan, Finch & Associates. The name hit her like a jolt. Finch. The doctor who signed Torin's sterility report was Dr. Alistair Finch. Exactly, Liam said, his eyes glinting. It could be a coincidence, but in this world, I don't believe in them. It seems Dr. Finch didn't just diagnose Torrin. He may have stayed in the family's orbit, or at least his firm did. The connection was chilling. The doctor who knew Torrin's most profound secret was linked to the clinic where she had her last checkup before the pregnancy. It felt like a deliberate, carefully woven web. "We have to go," she said, her resolve hardening. "The clock is ticking." Liam had arranged for a discreet car service, not a yellow cab. "Torrin will have eyes," he'd said. "Assume we're being watched." The journey back to Park Avenue was fraught with a new kind of terror. This wasn't her home anymore. It was enemy territory. She was a spy on a mission. As planned, Torrin's Bentley was gone from the private garage. They used the service elevator again. Liam carried 2 large empty duffel bags. "Essentials only, Katya," he cautioned as they stepped into the silent, opulent foyer. "Documents, sentimental items, clothes you can't live without. Nothing he can track. Leave the jewelry he bought you. It's just another set of chains." The penthouse was eerily quiet. It was as if the argument from the night before had been sucked into the expensive upholstery, leaving behind a charged, toxic residue. While Liam stood watch at the door, Katya flew into action. She went straight to their bedroom, a vast space of cool grays and chrome that had always felt more like a hotel suite than a sanctuary. She grabbed her passport, her birth certificate, and a small box of old family photos from her bedside table. She packed jeans, sweaters, and sensible shoes, the clothes of the woman she used to be before Torrin had dressed her up like a doll. She left the designer gowns and jewel-encrusted heels hanging in the closet like the shed skin of a former life. Then her eyes fell on the ensuite bathroom. On the marble countertop sat a sleek silver bottle. "Vie éternelle prenatal formula," the elegant script read. "Torrin's specially compounded Swiss vitamins." Her heart pounded. She grabbed the bottle along with a sealed, unopened one from the medicine cabinet. This could be the proof they needed. Her final stop was Torrin's study. It was a place she rarely entered, his sanctum sanctorum. The room was dark-paneled in mahogany and smelled of leather and his expensive cologne. It was the heart of his empire and his secrets. "Katya, we need to go," Liam whispered from the doorway. "Just 1 minute," she said, her instincts screaming at her. She went behind his massive desk. She didn't know what she was looking for. His computer was password protected. But in his top desk drawer beneath a stack of neatly organized papers was a slim leather-bound folio. It wasn't a company document. It looked private. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The first page was a contract, a service agreement between Torrin Hawthorne and a company she'd never heard of, the Genesis Clinic. Her eyes scanned the legalese until they landed on a phrase that made the air freeze in her lungs. "For services rendered in the procurement and cryopreservation of donor gametes." Donor gametes. Sperm. She flipped the page. It was a profile. A donor profile. Donor 734. It listed his physical characteristics, height, hair color, eye color, all remarkably similar to Torrin's. It listed his academic achievements and a clean bill of health. But the name was redacted, blacked out with a thick marker. Then she saw the payment schedule. A series of large wire transfers from a private account of Torrin's to the Genesis Clinic. And below that, a second set of payments. A monthly retainer paid to a woman, Serafina Dubois. The memo line for each payment was the same consulting fee. Who was Serafina Dubois? A consultant for what? And why was Torrin paying a fertility clinic for donor sperm when he was supposedly trying to have a baby with his wife, Katya? Now Liam's voice was urgent. She snapped a picture of every page with her phone, her hands shaking so badly the first few were blurry. She shoved the folio back in the drawer and ran out of the study, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest. As they were about to leave, the main elevator dinged. Her blood turned to ice. It couldn't be Torrin. He was at his board meeting. The elevator doors slid open and a woman stepped out. She was in her late 60s, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, her silver hair styled in a flawless chignon. Her face was a mask of aristocratic disdain. It was Jessamine Hawthorne, Torrin's mother, She surveyed the scene, Katya clutching a purse, Liam holding 2 duffel bags, and her thin lips curled into a semblance of a smile. It didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Well, well," she said, her voice as crisp and brittle as old money. "Leaving so soon, Katya? And with your brother, the little radical?" I see Torin's assessment of the situation was, as always, astute. Liam stepped in front of Katya protectively. "Mrs. Hawthorne, we're leaving." Jessamyn's gaze swept over him dismissively before landing back on Katya. "Are you foolish little girl. Did you really think you could just walk away? Did you think my family would allow a complication like you to disrupt everything?" "This has nothing to do with you, Jessamyn," Katya said, finding her voice. "Oh, but it has everything to do with me," she replied, taking a step closer. The scent of her expensive perfume, Jean Patou's Joy, filled the air, a cloying, suffocating fragrance. A legacy is at stake. The Hawthorne name, my grandchild. Her eyes dropped to Katya's stomach, and her expression softened into something that for a terrifying moment looked like warmth. "You don't have to run, dear. We can be reasonable. Torin is angry, yes. He is proud. But he can be managed. I can talk to him." She opened her handbag and pulled out a checkbook. "You are carrying a Hawthorne. That makes you important to us. But you are not equipped to be its mother. Give us the child. I will personally see to it that you are set up for life. A new name, a beautiful home in the south of France. Anything you desire. You can live out your days in comfort. All you have to do is sign the papers after the birth and walk away." It was the same offer Torin had made, but coated in a veneer of matriarchal concern that was somehow more repulsive. She wasn't just offering to buy the baby. She was offering Katya a golden cage in exchange for her soul. "He is not a Hawthorne," Katya said, her voice shaking with rage. "I don't know who he is, but he is not a Hawthorne, and he is my son. Mine. He is not for sale." Jessamyn's mask of civility crumbled. Her face hardened, her eyes flashing with a venomous fury that was so much like her son's. "You ungrateful little tramp! You come into my son's life with nothing, and this is how you repay him, by opening your legs to some stranger and trying to pass off your bastard child as his." "That's enough," Liam said, his voice deadly calm. "We're done here." He took Katya's arm and steered her toward the service elevator. Jessamyn's voice followed them down the hall, shrill and laced with panic. "You won't get away with this. Torin will find you. He will take that child from you, and he will leave you with nothing. You will be ruined. Do you hear me? Ruined." The service elevator doors slid shut, cutting off her tirade. Katya collapsed against the wall, trembling uncontrollably. She had known Torin was a monster, but now she knew the monstrosity was inherited. The entire Hawthorne family was rotten to the core. They didn't care about a child. They cared about an heir, a commodity. Back in the car, speeding away from that life for good, Katya showed Liam the photos on her phone. He scrolled through them, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The Genesis Clinic," he muttered. "Donor 734. Serafina Dubois." He looked up at her, his eyes dark with a chilling realization. "Katya, this is darker than we imagined. He wasn't just hiding his sterility. He had a plan, an elaborate premeditated plan to create an heir using a donor, and he was going to pass the child off as his own." "But how did I get pregnant?" she cried, the question still tormenting her. "If I didn't have IVF, how did the donor sperm?" Liam looked at the picture of the vitamin bottle, then back at the legal documents on the phone. "I don't know for sure," he said slowly, his voice grim. "But I have a sickening theory. It's called cryptic insemination. It's highly unethical, illegal in most places, and almost impossible to prove. But for a man with Torin's resources and connections to Dr. Finch's network and a private clinic, he wouldn't need your consent if he could bypass it entirely." The implication was horrifying. The vitamins from Switzerland. the private clinic. Dr. Hansen. Had her routine checkup been anything but? Had she been inseminated like livestock without her knowledge or consent? It was a violation so profound she couldn't wrap her mind around it. Now we have a name. Liam said, his voice like steel. Serafina Dubois. She's the key. We find her. We find out her role in all this, and we find out the identity of donor 734. He looked at Katya, his hand covering hers. This is our new mission. We're not just escaping Katya. We're hunting. They went to ground, retreating to a secluded family cabin in the Catskills. The isolation was a balm to Katya's fractured nerves. While she focused on her health, Liam converted the rustic living room into a war room. He hired a sharp private investigator, an ex-cop named Marcus Thorne, who began charting the dark constellation of Torrens' deceit, the doctors, the clinics, and the mysterious Serafina Dubois. The first breakthrough came from the unopened bottle of Swiss vitamins. Liam had it sent to a lab for analysis. The results were sickening. It's worse than we thought, Liam said, his face grim as he read the report. The pills weren't just nutrients. They contained a powerful sedative and a cocktail of hormones designed to optimize fertility. The clinical words painted a horrifying picture. He was drugging me, Katya whispered, the violation stealing her breath. She had been an unwilling participant in her own pregnancy. Her anger, once a spark, now hardened into cold, unbreakable resolve. Soon after Marcus Thorne's investigation bore fruit, the money trail laundered through shell corporations led him to Serafina Dubois. He found her address in a discreet Soho apartment building. I have to see her, Katya declared, her voice firm. The time for hiding was over. They approached with caution. While Liam and Marcus waited nearby, Katya went to the building alone, her heart a steady drum against her ribs. She buzzed the apartment. My name is Katya Hawthorne, she said into the intercom, her voice clear. We need to talk about Torren. After a tense silence, the lock clicked open. The woman who answered the door. Serafina was not the cold accomplice Katya had envisioned. She was elegant, with intelligent, weary eyes that held a universe of regret. Mrs. Hawthorne, she said softly, I knew this day would come. Please come in. Inside the minimalist apartment, the truth finally spilled out. I was a geneticist. Serafina began, her hands trembling. I ran a fertility clinic called Genesis. Torren came to me years ago, obsessed with having a biological heir he knew he could never produce. When I told him it was impossible, he changed the plan. He wanted a child that appeared to be his, using a donor who was a perfect physical match. Donor 734. Katya breathed. Serafina nodded. But that wasn't enough for him. He insisted the child be carried by you to complete the illusion. I told him it was illegal, a monstrous ethical breach. But he had leveraged my brother's gambling debts. Torren paid them, and in return he owned me. He forced me to orchestrate everything. The drugged vitamins, the procedure. Dr. Hansen at the Westwood Clinic was one of his puppets, too. Her voice broke. I am so sorry. I've lived with this guilt every day. The confession was damning, but one final crucial question remained. Who was the donor? Katya asked, her voice trembling. Who is my baby's father? A fresh wave of fear washed over Serafina's face. Torren's cruelty has layers, she explained. He wanted the donor to be someone he could control completely, an insurance policy. He chose his younger brother, Michael. The name landed with the force of a physical blow. Michael Hawthorne, the disowned artist, the family disgrace. Torren despised him, Serafina whispered. He found Michael, offered him life-changing money to be the donor, and forced him to sign an NDA and disappear. It was his ultimate twisted victory to use the genetics of the brother he hated to create the heir he would raise as his own. Armed with Serafina's sworn affidavit, Liam's team moved swiftly. They located Michael Hawthorne living a quiet, anonymous life in a small town on the coast of Maine. He was a painter of melancholic seascapes, a man haunted by a deal he had never fully understood. Katja traveled to Maine to meet him. Standing on a wind-swept cliff overlooking the Atlantic, she saw a man who shared Torin's frame, but none of his menace. His eyes were kind. They were her baby's eyes. "I am so sorry," Michael said, his voice thick with regret. "I never knew." In that moment, standing beside the stranger, who was the biological father of her child, Katja felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. He was not a ghost. He was family. The final confrontation was not a dramatic showdown, but a swift legal execution. Liam presented Torin's lawyers with their arsenal: Serafina's testimony, the lab reports, Michael's statement, and the threat of criminal charges for assault and unlawful insemination. The story, if made public, would not just tarnish the Hawthorne name, it would obliterate the entire empire. Jessamine Hawthorne attempted a desperate smear campaign, but against the mountain of evidence it was useless. Faced with total ruin, Torin folded. The divorce was quiet and absolute. The fraudulent prenup was voided, and Katja accepted a settlement that would ensure her child's security. She refused to take a penny more of his blood money. Torin relinquished all paternal rights in exchange for their silence on Michael's identity, a final pathetic attempt to control a narrative he had already lost. Katja walked away from the marriage with her freedom, her dignity, and the precious life inside her. 2 months later, she gave birth to a beautiful, healthy boy. She named him Liam after the brother who had saved her, and gave him the last name Vance. He had his Uncle Michael's kind eyes and his mother's resilient spirit. Michael became a quiet, loving presence in their lives, his art slowly filling with a light that had long been absent. Katja never saw Torin or Jessamine again. The last she heard, Hawthorne Holdings was in turmoil, and Torin had become a recluse in his golden penthouse, a king ruling an empire of shadows. He had his legacy, but he was utterly alone, having lost the future he tried so desperately to steal. Katja, however, had found hers. It wasn't a life of opulence, but it was real, and it was free. Katja's journey started with a shocking betrayal in the cold, sterile light of an ultrasound room, and ended with her reclaiming her strength, her identity, and her future. She escaped a gilded cage, exposed a web of lies that ran deeper than she could ever have imagined, and fought for the most precious thing in her life, her child. Her story is a powerful testament to resilience, the unbreakable bond of family, and the fact that truth is a power that even a millionaire's money cannot suppress. What would you have done in Katja's position? Let us know in the comments below. If you were inspired by her incredible strength, please hit the like button and share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable true life stories of drama, survival, and ultimate triumph. Thank you for listening.